Greetings. This is Stan Houston for the Jesus Entrepreneur Experience. This is a challenging day, like every day. But particularly, people are wondering, is the possibility of war in the Middle East, is that coming closer? And what is that going to mean for everybody? And obviously, it will affect everybody. And then I'd like to talk about point of the moment. Then I want to talk about being an entrepreneur. And this is a day in which I want to salute a man who's 98 today, a gentleman who lived an entrepreneurial life, but he held a job all his life. But his style was such that he reflects the courage and the creativity of a true entrepreneur. And he's 98 today. And there was actually a movie kind of made about him. And that was because of his experience in the Second World War. All of that's coming up today. I'm Stan Houston, the Jesus Entrepreneur Experience. 18 to 20, maybe even 25 minutes today of an experience where you will learn something you don't know, and perhaps you'll learn more here by accident than most places by design. The program starts right now. And we are back, and as many of you know who are listening to this program, I'm encouraging you that you will have to learn how to do a radio, an iPodRadio broadcast, and you're going to have to give this means of business and life and organizational communication a try, at least an experiment, and it might be the thing that makes a difference in your life and business. But I'm going to be talking about that a lot because I'll be teaching you how to achieve a lot by doing just that. But here's a moment for you. Yes, this is Thursday late afternoon, evening, and we're wondering because this is point of the moment. I just didn't make this a week ago, so we could air it today. I'm talking to you while what is happening is actually happening right now. And the power, you think of all of the kinds of advertising, the brochure, the flyer, all of that stuff, you cannot speak right to the moment. Oftentimes it was done months, maybe even years ago. But when you are involved in the media called radio and perhaps television and video, you can talk about what is literally happening right today and bring that into people's lives. And perhaps you've got something to say about it, maybe some solutions to problems they have, some fears that need comforting. You can speak right to the moment. We call it pod. Again, remember, purpose of the day. You can have it is the point of the day, and POM, point of the moment. You can speak right to the day and right to the moment and talk about what is going on in people's lives right then. If I may, before we talk a little bit about George, I want to help you understand why I sometimes say everybody should begin to live like an entrepreneur, even though they may not own their own business. In this sense, the Jesus Entrepreneur Program, the Christian Entrepreneur Network, is for everybody. But we focus primarily on those people who take the challenge seriously of creating their own destiny, by creating their own career, by creating their own business, by building a life and a business of their choosing that works well, that helps them feel fully alive, gets them more and more freedom in their life, and that business, that building, that thing that they're creating makes a difference. It matters. And isn't it nice to know that what you're doing in life matters? Because let me tell you, what most people are doing in life doesn't really matter. Just let that sit on your head for a while. Now, Here's what I mean. First of all, an entrepreneur, it is a state of mind, of spirit and soul. To be an entrepreneur is to think differently. It's a state of mind. Even more than your mind, it's a state of your spirit, and maybe even a state of your soul. Think about that, and perhaps you want to ask me questions about that. I'd love to talk to you about it. RadioEdge77@gmail.com, RadioEdge77@gmail.com. I'll talk to you. I'll coach you, because that's what I do, and I do it well. Secondly, entrepreneurship is a style. It's a style, a way of living, working, and creating. Yeah, you've heard the expression lifestyle. Well, it is all of that and more. It's a way of living. It's a style of living. It's a style of working. And it's a style of creating. Now, I'm going to hire, if I finally have to, most of the people who will work in my companies will be independent contractors, or they will be playing partners. But if they have to be employees by the very nature of their work and the nature of the legal system that's there, and perhaps what they need in their life, they will have to think like an entrepreneur. They will have to live that style. And then, to make it right incarnationally, make it very present in people, to be an entrepreneur, it's a way of structuring a career and structuring a business. It's something that is truly there, present, real, built. Now remember, if you're an entrepreneur, you're not just a dreamer and a doer. Unfortunately, most entrepreneurs are just dreamers and they never get doing, and that's the problem. But not only are you a dreamer or a doer, you are a thinker. And how you think will influence how you behave, and how you behave will channel and choose and lead to your destiny. So there we go. An entrepreneur. First of all, it's a state of mind, spirit, and soul. It is a style, a way of living and working and creating. It's a structure of a career and a business. There we are, 8 minutes into the program. And now let's just take a little break. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about George, who's 98 today, and a man of exceptional courage and creativity, and someone who I admire a great deal. I'm Stan Houston, tcenglobal.org/contribute now. tcenglobal.org/contribute now. I would be grateful if you would help us out as we begin to go and grow. And I believe that what we have is useful to you, and it's free to you. But if you want to help us out, we would be grateful. And if you just want to check us out, there you go, tcenglobal.org, tcenglobal.org. More about George and his story. That's next on the Jesus Entrepreneur Experience. I met George, Uncle George, almost, half-century ago. That's right, because I was trying to get a young woman named Karen to be interested in me, and that was going pretty well. And in one of the family occasions, I met Uncle George. Now, Uncle George was really a social guy. He was something else. And I found out that he had been a rather world-class athlete, particularly in high school, a state champion, even though he was kind of a short little guy, but he was an athlete. And he was also a very creative and thoughtful teacher, and he was from Hibbing, Minnesota. By the way, the same place of a student there named Bobby Zimmerman, who literally, of course, became Bob Dylan. And for those of you who are sports fans, Coach George Smilanich was his name. Smilanich was also eventually a coach to a young man named Kevin McHale, who literally went on to Boston Celtics fans and fame as quite an NBA basketball player. And George was involved in that part of life too. Well, he'd been quite an athlete, but his college career was cut short because he was drafted into the Army because Pearl Harbor took place. And before he knew it, he was serving as a tank driver in the United States Army. He didn't talk about it very much, and I tried to get him to tell me more. I told him, I'm a history teacher, and I'd love to hear some of your stories. And that's where I finally realized that he had some experience there, but he didn't want to talk about it that much. Well, every time we met, I talked a little bit more, and then through a process of years, because I tried to be a good entrepreneur, and that is, I tried to be interested in people. Now, if you're an entrepreneur, first of all, you're going to have to be an interesting person. There has to be something about you that draws some interest. But one of the best ways to be interesting is to be interested in others. And I was very interested in his story. And more, he would talk about it. And I found out he had been in North Africa, and then in Sicily and Italy, and then in Normandy and in France. And eventually, at the very end of the war, that very famous picture of Roosevelt, no, not then, of Truman, of Stalin, and the Prime Minister of Great Britain, who had just succeeded Winston Churchill in Potsdam. Because George was Serbian, he understood Russian, and there were a lot of Russians at that Potsdam conference. He was even there at the very end of the war. He fought under a guy named George Patton. So George was led by George. And he will smile eventually and say, yeah, I had a few run-ins with the general. He used his famous language at me on a couple of occasions. But what happened was that George went through the war as a tank driver, escaped death on a number of occasions. Unfortunately, some of his tank mates did not, as it was shot out from under him. And he survived, and then, of course, did what all of those men did at that time, and perhaps some women. After the war was over, he went back and married Mary Jane, the girl who waited for him, finished his degree at the University of Minnesota, and then spent an entire lifetime of career teaching in a variety of ways and coaching and simply being a mentor to many young men, primarily, as they went on to their life careers. He created something that he wanted to be, that was his passion, his purpose, and direction, and he lived it out and still is. Eventually, because of my encouragement, he began to tell more and more of his story. Eventually, he was even invited back to Europe on a couple of occasions, even a number of occasions, and the celebrations of the end of the war. Certainly one of the people who made it to Normandy. And eventually, Brad Pitt, you may have heard of him, decided he wanted to make a film about what it was like to be a tank driver in the Second World War, how it was to be a tank crew. And the film was called Fury. You may have seen it. You may have been a part of watching it. And the story is that Brad Pitt wanted to talk to a real tank guy, and they found out about George. And the story is, everyone laughs, supposedly there was a phone call, and Mary Jane picked it up and said, "Brad Pitt wants to talk to you." And in his own way, because he didn't know, he didn't care, he said, "Who the heck?" And he was a little stronger than that, is Brad Pitt. Well, it turns out he was asked to come to Hollywood, and the various men and women who were going to be in that film then talked to George. And they learned about what it was like and what it was, the experience of being a real tank driver in the Second World War throughout that terrible time in Europe. And that was part of his creation. As he said, I enjoyed it, had some great fun doing it. Certainly I had paid the price to be able to do that. I'm glad I went through it, but I'm certainly glad that I don't ever have to go through it again. He was a patriot. He was a coach. He was a teacher. He was a mentor. And in many ways, he was an entrepreneur. George is still around. Obviously, he's slowed down. Mary Jane has passed on. He's now with his children, needs a wheelchair, and that's really hard for a man like George to take, who was quite an athlete. But today, I salute my friend George. Uncle George. A man of character, a man of faith, a man who lived just exactly the way an entrepreneur might live. A Christian entrepreneur. So, happy birthday, Uncle George. 98 years of age. You're doing well, you're going well, and may the good Lord give you just a few more. All the best and blessings to George, and all the best and blessings to you. That's his story. What's your story? And we'd like to hear your story. Why don't you raise your hand and say, "Stan, I would like some coaching on how to be and do what you do and build a business as an entrepreneur." We can help you. I'd like to be a podcaster. I'd like to do a radio. I'd like to be able to tell my story. We'd love to hear from you. Again, we make it very simple. Raise your hand and Radio Edge 77. Radio Edge 77 at gmail.com. Radio Edge 77 at gmail.com. That's it. That's the program. Usually under 20 minutes. There's a good reason for that, and you'll learn that in our class and course on how you can become a business radio broadcaster. To build a business, build a career, and make a difference. Perhaps become even slightly famous like Uncle George. Until next time, bye for now.